Welcome back to Presidio.codes. In this second video in this first video series, we're going to be taking a look at improving our script that we made in the prior video. So let's dive in. Okay. So if we look at our list of improvements that we want to make, first I want to use functions in our code. So instead of just having a long running string of code that runs in order, we're going to take some of the functionality and move those into separate functions and then call our functions in the main program. And second, we're going to use the with statement for file operations. So opening, reading, and closing of files, we'll use the with constructor as opposed to just opening the file and handling the closing ourselves. And then the third is we're going to add some command line arguments so we don't have to modify the script itself. We can just pass in command line arguments and reuse the script that way. And then we're going to add a shebang to our script, and I'll get into that once we get into that section on why it's important and what it does. And then also, lastly, we're going to add some docstrings for good documentation so we can come back to our code at a later time and see why we did something or what the function does or what have you. Okay, so let's move over to the editor and we'll get started. So in the prior video, if you recall, we read hosts from a CSV file, and we iterated over those, pinged them, and printed the output to the screen. So this is the code we left off with. So again, first we're gonna make it into functions. So let's go ahead and make our first function. We need to read in the CSV file. So let's put that in a function by itself. All right, so we'll call this read hosts. And now we're going to pass in a parameter called CSV file name. All right, so we can take our CSV reader code and just drop it up here inside the function. And for the read hosts function, I don't actually want to return a reader object. I want to return a Python list of hosts, just so that it's easier for us to work with when we do the rest of our code. So we're going to do the same sort of thing for row and reader. If the first name, the first item in the first line equals name, we're going to know that that's the header column. And we're going to pass over it. Else. Now, what I want to do is actually make a host list object. So we'll do host list equals an empty Python list. And we're going to iterate over the rows and say, if it's not the header row, we're going to do host list.append. And what we're going to append to that list is the row item. So for the current row that we're on in this for loop, we're going to append it to host list. And once we're finished with that, we're going to actually return our host list. So every function, or most functions probably, would have an input, they would do something, and then they would have a return statement to return something back. So in our case, we are passing in a CSV file name parameter, we're doing our iteration, and then we're finally returning a list. Okay, so now we have our read hosts. We need another function for pinging. So we'll say, we'll define a new function called isHostAlive. And so it's kind of useful sometimes not to, so when we're doing a check like this, is the host alive or is it not? If we write the function in such a way that it's a question, it's pretty clear that this would return a true or a false. So is host alive, yes or no? So that's the way I'll structure this. So we're going to pass in the host item, which is going to be a Python list that contains these two items. Okay, so we'll say is host alive. We'll go ahead and put in our ping stuff here. Say ping response. And okay, so host item, we need to change this. So instead of row, now it's host item, the second element, which would be the IP address here. All right, so we'll say, let's create another variable called isAlive, and we'll set it to false. So we're going ahead and setting this variable to a negative value. So if there's an event where I'm trying to call this variable, it'll always exist because I've already declared it. So we don't want to get into a situation where I'm trying, there's an if statement, but, there's a possibility that I run across this variable, but it isn't defined yet. So I'll go ahead and set it as false. So by default, regardless of what happens, we're going to say that the host is not alive. The only time that it would be alive is if we actually get a positive response from the ping command. So we'll say if ping response is equal to 0, then we'll go ahead and set is alive to true. Okay, so that should do it. So, and then, we have to return is alive. Okay. All right, so now that we have our two functions, we actually need to write our main body of code for the script that is actually going to execute when we run the function. So you'll probably have seen this in some Python scripts, but you might not quite be sure what it means. There's a special variable called underscore underscore name underscore underscore. And if we say if name equals main, then do stuff. So what this basically means is if you call the script directly from the command line, it's going to execute the code that's inside of this if statement. And in our case, we're going to be executing the script directly. So it's going to call this stuff, and eventually inside of this block, we're going to be calling our functions that are up here that don't necessarily execute when we first call our script. The stuff within this if name equals main is the first things to execute when we run our script. Okay, so what I want to do now is we'll go ahead and define a CSV. We'll say file name equals host.csv. All right, now we actually need to call our function that we made called read hosts. So we're going to say host list equals read hosts, and then we're going to pass in file name to that function. So when we execute this function, it's going to jump up here, read in our CSV file, and return to us a Python list. So now when it returns the Python list, host list is going to be now equal in our main program to that host list. Okay, so now that we have our host lists, we can go ahead and ping it. So we'll do a for loop for item in host list. We're going to call is host alive. Okay. And we'll just set a variable, say alive equals is host alive. So this alive variable will take the value either true or false. And then we can do something like this. We'll say pinging item 0, which is the name. Whoops. is the name here. So we're going to say we're pinging that host. Actually, we'll put that in front of this. Okay. And then we'll say if alive is true, so we don't even have to say is true. We can just say is alive, and that evaluates. That's basically asking the question, is alive true? If yes, we can print that the host is alive. Change that to item. And then we'll have an else statement, and we'll print that it's not alive. Okay. So I think this is pretty much it. Okay, so one thing I forgot to do is when we functionalize this, I forgot to close my file. It was still down at the bottom of the program. So we'll move up here to read hosts, and we'll go ahead and close our file here, and that should be good. So let's move over to the terminal and see if this works. All right. Okay, so it does appear to work. So that's a good first step. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and do a git commit on our code so we can snapshot this point in time with these changes that we've made. All right. All right, so we functionalized our code. It works. Okay, so let's move back to our list. Okay, so item number 2, we're going to use a with statement. So let's take a look at how we do that. All right, so since we're handling all the file operations in this one function, we'll put the with statement in here. So again, we're opening the file, and then down here we're closing it. And it doesn't seem that complex now, and you might not see the benefit, but when your code gets a little more complicated, it's easier to use the with constructor because it will handle automatic file closing for you. That's the main benefit. So let's do this. So it's similar to like an if statement. So you have with, with blah blah blah, and then inside of that with statement you have some code. So we'll say uh, with, and then we're going to open our file, and then there's something called as and f. You can name this whatever you want. You can name it CSV file if you want. It doesn't matter. I'll just leave it as f because that's what we were using. Now inside of here, inside of the with statement, we're actually going to indent. So basically, when you're inside of this with statement, the file is open and is being read, but once your code completes, it exits the with statement, and the with statement goes ahead and closes the file. So we actually no longer need to even specify a file close, because with is going to handle it for us. And one other thing I forgot to do actually previously is this was still hard-coded. So we're going to take this and put in the CSV file name. So whatever file name we pass into this function is going to work. It's not hard-coded anymore. So that's good. Okay, so that's pretty much it with the with statement. Let's just test it again to make sure that it works. Didn't mess something up. Okay, yeah, it works. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and do another git add, git commit. And if you're using an advanced editor, like I'm using PyCharm, but if you're using VS Code or Sublime Text or whatever. There are plugins for Git, so you don't necessarily have to do the Git commits via the CLI. I'm just doing it for the sake of the video, but you have Git integrations and it makes it a little easier. Okay, so added with statement, also fixed our hard-coded file name issue. Okay. All right. So let's move back to our list. Item number 3, command line arguments. Okay. So if we look at, so right now we still have a hard-coded value for host.csv. It's not ideal. Anytime you want to run the script, you have to open the script and modify it. So we're going to change that. We don't have to do that. All right, so let me steal some code from one of these other ones I did. So we're going to do an import statement called argparse. Argparse is just a Python library that we can use for importing, for getting command line arguments. All right. So just to try and keep this video short, I just pulled this code that I already made, but I'll go through it. All right. So instead of hard-coding the value, we're going to delete that. So we're going to make a new parser variable. We're going to instantiate this and put in our description of our program. We're going to add an argument called -f. It's going to stand for file name, and the destination is going to be, actually we'll make the destination file name. So destination means args dot, well, I guess we can leave it CSV file. All right, so CSV file name means when you call it later on, you're going to call args dot, and then this attribute, this sub variable, so to speak, is called CSV file name, and that's where our file name is going to be stored as a variable. So we're saying file name equals, and then we set it to this. And then the rest of our script is the same. Host list equals read hosts. We're passing in file name. All right, so one of the nice benefits is, so let me go ahead and save this. We'll go back to our terminal. Okay, so let's run this thing. Okay, so if I run it with nothing, it says, hey, you're missing a file argument. All right, I can now do -h for help. Gives me a nice help function with my script. So it says, okay, this program pings a host from CSV file, and I need to specify -f for file name. So now if I do -f and put in host.csv, now it's going to read in that file name, and thus we're back to where we were. So now we don't have to modify the script whatsoever. So let's go ahead and do a git add and a git commit. Okay. All right, our next item here, let's go back to our list. All right, so shebang. So a shebang is basically something, it's not just Python specific, it's a lot of scripting languages use this. What you can do is you can specify shebang at the very top of your script that's going to basically tell your operating system what program to execute the script with. So in our example, it's Python. So let's move back to the terminal real quick and I'll show you. Let's see, we'll do, let's look at which Python we're running. So Python is user bin Python. Okay. All right, so let's do me go up here. Okay. So what I just did was I switched into a virtual environment. So I've just been running this in the default Python environment on my machine, but now I dropped into a virtual environment so I can install Python packages that I need for this specific project and not other projects. And we don't have any conflicts or anything. But now that I'm in here, if I look at the Python executable now, it's actually running a different Python now. So the actual executable for Python is different. So now if I hit Python, now we're on Python 3.6.6, which I believe before it was probably Python 2.6.2.7. Yeah. All right, so let me go pippin shell again. There we go. Okay. So yeah, we're back in 3.6. Anyway, the point being is, if I show you the Python executable, I can make a shebang. I can make a shebang in my script that says, hey, when you run this script, you need to execute it with this Python executable. All right, so let's move back to our editor. And a shebang is always the same format. It's £, exclamation point, and then the executable that you want to run it with. So if I save that, the benefit here is now when I go back to my terminal, let's see, go back to my directory. All right, so you might have to do this, you might not. I've already done it. My script is actually marked as executable. You can see that with the X flag. So if I did not have it with executable flag enabled, I would not be able to directly execute the script. I would have to type in Python and then the name of the script. But now that it's marked executable and we have the shebang in there, all we have to do is call the script directly. So I'll just do the dash help for now. So you can see that that works, but now if I pass the script to you and you download it on your machine and you try and execute it, it's not going to work. And it's not going to work because the shebang is incorrect. The shebang is specific to my environment. This home, C. Curtis, blah, 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 blah. So there is a convention or a thing in Linux. It probably exists in Windows, I'm not sure, but it's a special program called env. So you can say user bin env, and then you can specify an executable name. And if you see there, user bin env Python actually executed the correct Python executable in my virtual environment. So whatever your environment is, it will find the correct Python, the current Python, and it will use that to execute your script. So let's move back to the editor, and instead of having our very custom one that's specific to my machine, if we start all of our scripts with user bin env space Python, now our script is portable between systems. All right, so now again, if we run it, we should be okay. So now all I have to do is run our script, and it works. So that's the benefit of shebang. So now you can run your script a little more intuitively, and it's, I guess, cross-compatible with different systems. All right, so let's go ahead and do git add, git commit. All right. Now moving on to our final improvement on our script. We are going to add some docstrings. So this code is all fine, but in a week or two, I'm not going to remember why I did a particular thing. So let's go ahead and document this up a little bit. So again, if you're using an advanced editor like PyCharm or Sublime Text or something, there are plugins and things that help you with documentation. One of my favorites is called Auto Docstring. So if you do 3 quotes, it's automatically going to fill in some things here. All right, so, and typically you can write your function and then populate this because it's automatically going to figure out all the things that you're passing in, and it's going to kind of give you some boilerplate documentation. So you can say, you know, this function reads a CSV and returns a list of hosts. Pretty simple. And then our parameter CSV file name is a string representing a file path on the file. Okay. And then what does it return? It returns a Python list of hosts. Each list item contains a name and IP address. Okay, so pretty straightforward. But now this is documented. So, and another nice benefit of using docstrings is there are other packages that can automate your documentation. So if you're working on a large body of code, you can use something like Sphinx, which is another package to do auto documentation for you, and it can make web-based hyperlinked, documentation for you based on these docstrings. So you just document your code, and when you go to publish it or what have you, it'll generate your docs for you. Pretty handy. So let's move on to the next one. Let's document this. We'll do a triple double quote. Okay, this function pings a host and turns true if host is alive. Okay, host item is going to be a Python list with 2 elements. Element 0 is the name. Element 1 is the IP address. And it returns true if the host is pingable, false if it is not. Okay, so pretty easy documentation for this one, and then we can of course put in inline comments here. We can say take command on arguments user. Okay, and this is going to be our CSV file name. Okay, list of hosts. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory. All right, so let's go ahead and move back and do our, just make sure we didn't break anything. I doubt we did. Okay, so we're still good. And we'll do our git add, git commit. Okay. All right, so one last time, it looks like we've made all of our improvements. And as you can see in the editor, a few more lines of code, but now I'd say this is a pretty well thought out script, and it's going to work as expected for a long time. So, again, and if we want to add additional functionality, now it's modularized in such a way that that's not an issue. It's pretty easy to do, to extend the script to do additional things now. So, all right, again, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll have another one soon. If you have any ideas for scripts or things that you want to see in the next video, please do let us know. We're available on this YouTube channel or on the Presidio.codes Cisco Teams room.